Hey there, my fellow truth-seekers. Imagine this. A desperate young woman cornered by debt and with her family's future hanging by a thread accepts a billionaire's marriage proposal. Not out of love, but out of pure, unadulterated necessity. Sounds like the plot of a wild romance novel, right? But what if I told you this story takes a darker turn? What if the billionaire's past isn't just shady, but downright dangerous? Caroline Dawson did the unthinkable to save her family. She said "I do" to Levi Schmidt, a man whose wealth could buy kingdoms, but whose past is a black hole of secrets. The question isn't whether she'll regret it, it's how deep the rabbit hole goes. Because in this tale, the vows aren't just for better or worse, they're a leap into the unknown. So buckle up, because we're diving into a world where luxury masks lies, and love might just be the ultimate bargaining chip. Are you ready to uncover the dark secrets behind the glittering facade? Let's get started. Caroline Dawson's hands shook as she pored over the mountain of overdue bills. The Dawson family was sinking fast. Her father's medical debt alone was enough to break them, and now the bank was threatening to foreclose on their ancestral home. "We're gonna lose everything," her mother kept repeating, her voice trembling like the fragile walls of their crumbling world. Caroline's younger brother, Timmy, sat in the corner, his eyes wide with fear. The phone hadn't stopped ringing in days. Debt collectors were relentless, their voices cold and unforgiving. Caroline's chest tightened as she stared at the eviction notice. "Mom, what are we gonna do?" she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of desperation. Out of the shadows, Levi Schmidt appeared. Dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his presence filled the room with an intensity that made Caroline's breath hitch. His icy blue eyes scanned the Dawson living room, taking in every detail of their chaos. "I've been watching your family's situation," he said, his voice smooth as silk, but edged with something sharper. "I can make all your problems disappear." The room fell silent. Timmy clutched his stuffed bear, his tiny fingers digging into its fabric. Caroline's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "How?" she breathed. Levi leaned forward, his smile not reaching his eyes. "It's simple. Marry me, and your debts are gone." Poof. The word hung in the air, mocking and ominous. Caroline stared at Levi, her mind racing. "You're joking, right?" she blurted out, incredulous. Levi's smirk deepened. "I don't joke about business, Miss Dawson. This is a deal, nothing more. Marriage with a price. No love, no illusions, just a contract." He slid a diamond ring across the table. It gleamed under the dim light, a stark contrast to the Dawsons' worn surroundings. "You have until tomorrow to decide," he added, turning to leave. Caroline's fingers brushed the ring. Its cold surface sent a shiver down her spine. "Wait," she called out. Levi paused, his posture rigid. "Why us?" she asked. "Why help us?" Levi turned slowly, his gaze piercing. "Let's just say I have interests in your family's survival." With that, he was gone, leaving Caroline to wonder what kind of monster she might be marrying. That night, Caroline lay awake, the weight of Levi's proposal pressing down on her. The billionaire's hidden past haunted her thoughts. What secrets lurked behind his perfect facade? The Dawsons' future hung in the balance. Her mother's. Quiet sobs echoed from the next room. Timmy's small voice drifted through the walls. "Will the scary man come back?" he asked. Caroline's heart ached. She pictured Levi's cold demeanor and the way he'd studied her family like they were pawns in a game. "He's our only option," her mother had whispered earlier. But as Caroline traced the outline of the ring in her pocket, she couldn't shake the feeling that this lifeline came with chains attached. Secrets behind the mansion walls were calling her name, and she was walking straight into their trap. The next morning, Caroline stood at the mansion gates, her stomach churning. Levi's chauffeur waited patiently, his expression unreadable. She glanced back at her family's house one last time. Her mother waved weakly from the porch, her face pale with worry. Timmy stood beside her, his backpack packed in case they had to leave. Caroline took a deep breath and stepped into the car. As the gates closed behind her, she felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Levi's office was cold and impersonal, his desk a sleek black marble. He didn't look up from his papers as she entered. "You've made your choice," he stated, rather than asked. Caroline nodded, her throat dry. "I said, I do, to save them," she whispered, the words bitter on her tongue. Levi finally met her gaze. "Good choice," he said, sliding a stack of documents toward her. "Sign here." The wedding was a lavish affair, the kind that made headlines. She chose her family, but at what cost? The tabloids asked. Caroline stood at the altar in a gown that sparkled like a diamond, but felt heavier than lead. Levi's face was a mask of perfection, billionaire by day, stranger by night. As she repeated her vows, her eyes darted to the crowd. Her family sat in the front row, their smiles forced but grateful. Levi's grip on her hand was firm, almost painful. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant intoned. Cheers erupted, but Caroline felt nothing but numbness. That night, in their sprawling mansion, Levi left her alone in the marital suite. "I'll see you at breakfast," he said, his voice distant. Caroline collapsed onto the bed, the reality of her silent sacrifice hitting her like a tidal wave. Days turned into weeks, and the routine of their marriage of convenience fell into place. Everyone envied Caroline's life, the opulent home, the designer clothes, the jet-set lifestyle. But behind closed doors, Levi was a stranger in a tailored suit. He would disappear for days, leaving Caroline with nothing but unanswered questions. The staff whispered in hushed tones whenever he was away. "He's got a past, that one," the housekeeper muttered one day, her eyes darting to the locked office door. Caroline's curiosity simmered, but she knew better than to ask. Until one rainy afternoon, while Levi was away, she found herself standing before that door. The key was in the lock. Her pulse quickened. With a deep breath, she turned it. And that's when she found the first clue to the husband she thought she knew. The mansion was a gilded cage, and Caroline Dawson felt like a bird trapped inside. Every morning she'd wake up to the soft glow of sunlight filtering through silk curtains, the diamond on her finger a constant reminder of the bargain she'd made. But the smile she wore for the cameras, the one that said, "I'm happy, I'm loved," never quite reached her eyes. Levi Schmidt was a ghost in their shared life, billionaire by day, stranger by night. He'd leave before dawn and return long after dark, his presence felt but never truly known. At dinners, he'd sit across from her, polite but distant, his conversations reserved for business and politics, never personal. Caroline would watch him, trying to read the man behind the mask. Was there a hint of warmth buried beneath the ice? Or was he truly as cold as he seemed? The staff moved around them like shadows, their whispers lingering in the halls. "He's got a past," the housekeeper would say, her voice low. "A past that could sink us all." Caroline's curiosity burned, but she knew better than to ask. No questions allowed was the unspoken rule in their marriage. So she'd smile, she'd nod, and she'd wonder what secrets the walls of their opulent prison were holding back. The days blurred into weeks, and Levi's pattern never wavered. He'd disappear for days on end, leaving Caroline alone with her thoughts in the mansion's eerie silence. She'd spend hours in the library, reading books that offered escapes to worlds far from her reality. Gone with the Wind became her companion, Scarlett O'Hara's resilience, a mirror to her own silent struggle. At least Scarlett had Rhett, she'd mutter to herself, closing the book with a sigh. Levi's absence was a wound that never healed, a constant reminder that their union was built on convenience, not love. The newspapers loved her. The billionaire's bride, they called her, their headlines dripping with envy. Everyone envied her life, but they had no idea of the coldness that lived within those marble walls. Caroline would stand on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below, and wonder what Levi was doing in the shadows. Was he thinking of her? Did he ever feel the weight of their unspoken words? The questions haunted her, but the answers remained locked behind his carefully constructed facade. One evening, as the rain poured outside, Levi returned earlier than usual. Caroline was in the study, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes glazed over from reading. He stood in the doorway, his suit dark with rainwater, his expression unreadable. "You're always reading," he said, breaking the silence. Caroline jumped, her heart racing. It's a habit," she stammered, closing her book. Levi stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. The air felt charged, the tension between them palpable. "Why did you really do it?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. "Marry me, I mean." Caroline's mind went blank. Was he really asking her that, after all this time? "I told you, my family," she said, avoiding his gaze. Levi moved closer, his presence overwhelming. "Lies," he murmured. "You could have found another way. Why me?" The room seemed to shrink around them. Caroline's breath hitched. "Maybe I wanted to know what it's like to be someone else," she whispered, defiance creeping into her voice. Levi's eyes flashed. "Dangerous game, Caroline." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. And just like that, the moment shattered. Levi turned and left, the door closing with a soft click. Caroline stared at the spot where he'd stood, her heart pounding. The husband she thought she knew was becoming someone else right before her eyes. Caroline found herself wandering the mansion's corridors late at night, the silence both soothing and suffocating. The walls seemed to whisper secrets, the paintings watching her with judgmental eyes. She'd pass by Levi's closed office door, the one with the brass plaque that read "Private," and wonder what lay beyond it. The locked office, a hidden room filled with clues to Levi's past, called to her like a siren song. One night, unable to sleep, she found herself standing before it. The key was nowhere to be found, of course. Levi kept it on him at all times. But as she traced the outline of the door with her fingertips, she felt a strange connection to the man behind it. What was he hiding? Was it something dangerous? Something that could destroy everything they'd built? The questions ate at her, but the fear of knowing held her back, until the night she overheard Levi on the phone, his voice urgent and foreign. "They're getting too close," he said in a language Caroline didn't recognize. Her blood ran cold. Late-night phone calls. In foreign tongues. What did they mean? Who was after Levi? And more importantly, would Caroline become collateral damage in whatever storm was brewing? The tension between them reached a boiling point one evening during a charity gala. The mansion was alive with laughter and champagne, the guests dressed to impress. Levi stood at Caroline's side, his arm resting possessively on her waist. "You look stunning," he said, his voice smooth for the audience. Caroline forced a smile. "Thank you," she replied, her gaze fixed on a group of guests. Across the room, she spotted a familiar face, Sarah, an old friend from college. Their eyes met, and Sarah's expression turned from surprise to concern. "Caroline," she called out, making her way through the crowd. "Is everything okay? You look different." Caroline's heart sank. Sarah had always been perceptive. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice shaky. Levi's grip tightened. "Caroline and I are perfectly happy," he interjected, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Sarah raised an eyebrow but dropped the subject. Later, as the guests mingled, Levi pulled Caroline aside. "You're slipping," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Remember our deal." Caroline's jaw tightened. "I remember," she hissed. But as the night wore on, and Levi's cold demeanor pushed everyone away, Caroline couldn't help but wonder, how long could she keep up this facade? The mask was cracking, and the truth was slipping out. A past tied to betrayal, danger, maybe. Even death was lurking in the shadows, waiting to consume them both. Caroline's breaking point came weeks later, during a storm that shook the mansion to its core. Levi had been gone for 5 days, and the staff was on edge. The housekeeper kept glancing at the phone as if expecting bad news. Caroline, unable to sit still, paced the living room. Where was he? What was he doing? The questions consumed her. Just as she was about to call his office, a risky move, Levi walked through the door, drenched and disheveled. "You're back," Caroline breathed, relief washing over her. Levi didn't respond. Instead, he stormed past her, his anger palpable. "What's wrong?" she asked, following him into the study. Levi whirled around, his eyes blazing. "This marriage, it's a mistake," he growled. Caroline froze. "What are you saying?" Levi ran a hand through his wet hair. "I can't do this anymore. The lies, the pretense, it's killing me." Caroline's heart raced. Was he ending it? Now, after everything? "You agreed to the terms," she said, her voice trembling. Levi laughed bitterly. "Terms? This was never just a deal for me. Caroline, I tried to make it real." The words hung in the air, shocking both of them. Caroline's breath hitched. "What are you saying?" Levi's gaze dropped. "I'll explain everything tomorrow," he murmured. "Tonight. Just rest." But as Caroline lay awake that night, Levi's words replayed in her mind. The truth was finally slipping out, and there was no turning back. What he hid could destroy everything, and Caroline wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. Caroline. Dawson's life was the stuff of fairy tales, at least that's what everyone said. The tabloids loved her. The billionaire's bride, from rags to riches, the perfect union. Paparazzi followed her every move, snapping photos, as she stepped out of luxury cars or attended high-profile events. Strangers on the street recognized her, whispering enviously as she passed by. But behind the glittering facade, Caroline felt like she was living a lie. The smiles she flashed for cameras were rehearsed. The laughter during charity galas felt hollow. Every time she posed with Levi for a photo, her heart ached with the weight of their unspoken truth. "They see what they want to see," Levi once said, his voice void of emotion. Caroline couldn't agree more. The public adored her, but they had no idea that her perfect life was built on a delicate house of cards, one that could collapse at any moment. At social events, Caroline became an expert at small talk, discussing art, fashion, and philanthropy with polished elegance. Yet, beneath the surface, she observed how guests would exchange pitying glances when they thought she wasn't looking. "She must be so lonely," one society matron had murmured at a gala. "Marrying for convenience. How tragic." Caroline's blood boiled at the judgment, but she forced a serene smile. Levi, ever the attentive host, would place a hand on her lower back, a gesture that was more possessive than affectionate. "Jealousy suits you," he'd whisper, his breath cool against her ear. Caroline would shiver, not from pleasure, but from the unsettling intimacy of their charade. The truth was, Levi's touch sent conflicting signals through her body, part revulsion, part inexplicable attraction. It was a dangerous game they played, and Caroline wondered how much longer she could keep up the pretense. The monthly charity balls became Caroline's personal nightmare. She'd spend hours preparing, selecting gowns that screamed opulence, while masking her inner turmoil. At one such event, a journalist cornered her, eyes gleaming with interest. "How does it feel to have it all, Mrs. Schmidt?" the woman asked, her pen poised over a notepad. Caroline's mind raced. "It's an adjustment," she replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. "But I'm grateful for the opportunity to give back." The journalist's smile faltered. "Some say you're just a gold digger," she pressed. Levi appeared suddenly at Caroline's side, his presence a shield. "My wife's charity work speaks for itself," he said, his tone leaving no room for further inquiry. The journalist retreated, but Caroline's heart hammered in her chest. Later that night, as Levi undressed in the ensuite bathroom, she confronted him. "Why do you always rescue me like that?" she asked, her voice edged with frustration. Levi's answer was a whisper. "Because the truth would bury us both." Caroline's only solace came in the form of her secret meetings with Sarah, her college confidant. They'd meet at a quaint cafe downtown, away from the prying eyes of Levi's security. Over steaming cups of tea, Caroline would confide in hushed tones. "I feel like I'm drowning in this life," she admitted one rainy afternoon. Sarah's eyes widened. "Why don't you leave?" she urged. Caroline shook her head. "It's not that simple. Levi's hold on my family's finances is too tight." Sarah's expression darkened. "He's manipulating you." Caroline's fingers tightened around her teacup. "I know." Yet, despite her growing resentment, Caroline found herself inexplicably drawn to Levi's complexity. There were moments, fleeting, rare, when she'd catch him staring at her, his guard down, revealing a vulnerability that made her heart ache. Was there a man beneath the billionaire's mask, or was she grasping at shadows? One evening, as Caroline browsed through Levi's study, a bold move given the no questions allowed rule, she stumbled upon a half-finished letter on his desk. The heading read, "To my wife Caroline," and the words beneath were raw, unfiltered. "I never meant to hurt you," it began. Caroline's breath caught. Was this Levi's attempt at honesty? Before she could read further, Levi entered the room, his eyes narrowing at the sight of her. "Intruding now, are we?" he said, his voice cold. Caroline's face flushed with guilt. "I'm sorry," she stammered, closing the letter. Levi snatched it from her hands and tossed it into the fireplace. "Some things are better left unsaid," he muttered. The flames consumed the paper, and with it, Caroline's fleeting hope of understanding him. As the ashes drifted down, Levi's expression softened marginally. "I'll take you to Paris next month," he offered abruptly. "A vacation, just us." Caroline hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, though the gesture felt hollow. The truth remained buried beneath layers of luxury, and Caroline wondered if it would ever see the light of day. Levi Schmidt was a man of routines, and Caroline had them memorized by heart. Mornings found him in the study, sipping black coffee while scanning financial reports, his posture rigid and unyielding. He'd depart by 7, his goodbye a curt nod or a brief, "See you tonight." Caroline often wondered if he rehearsed those moments in front of a mirror. Evenings were a ritual of polite detachment, dinner served at precisely 7:30, conversations restricted to topics like the stock market or upcoming events. "How was your day?" Caroline would ask, her tone light. Levi's responses were measured, clinical. "Productive," he'd reply, or "The board meeting went well." Never a hint of emotion, never a glimpse into the man beneath the suit. Caroline began to suspect that beneath his tailored exterior, Levi was a stranger in a tailored suit, a man who existed in the world but never truly lived in it. The physical intimacy between them was a landscape of contradictions. Levi's touches were never unwelcome, precisely calibrated to maintain the illusion of a happy marriage. A hand on the small of her back as they entered a function, a chaste kiss on her cheek before bed. But Caroline could count on one hand the number of times she'd seen genuine warmth in his eyes. One evening, after a particularly grueling charity dinner, Levi surprised her by pouring her a glass of wine. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said, his voice neutral. Caroline smiled. Thanks to your coaching. Levi's jaw tightened. This isn't about coaching, Caroline. It's about survival. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. For a moment, Caroline thought she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his gaze, something raw and human. But as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by the familiar icy mask. Rest up, he said, setting the glass down. We've got another gala in 2 days. And just like that, the moment dissolved, leaving Caroline to wonder if she'd imagined it all. Caroline's curiosity about Levi's past grew with each passing week, though she knew better than to ask outright. The staff had their own unspoken rules. Never mention Mr. Schmidt's travels, never inquire about his late-night calls. Yet hints slipped through the cracks. The housekeeper once mentioned a name in passing. Elena, she'd said, her voice hushed. An old acquaintance, Levi had clarified later, his tone leaving no room for further questions. Caroline found herself scouring Levi's schedule, noting the destinations he visited. Geneva, Dubai, Singapore, places that hinted at a life far removed from their current existence. One afternoon, while Levi was away, Caroline discovered a locked drawer in his desk. Her fingers hovered over it, temptation warring with fear. What secrets could be hiding behind that brass key? The answer came weeks later when she overheard Levi arguing on the phone in a language she didn't recognize. They can't find out, he growled, his voice urgent. The fear in his tone was unmistakable. Late-night phone calls in foreign tongues. Caroline realized then that Levi's past was not just distant, it was dangerous. The emotional distance between them became a character in their marriage, a silent third party that influenced every interaction. Caroline tried filling the void with hobbies, painting, gardening, even attempting to learn French from old textbooks. But nothing dulled the ache of Levi's emotional absence. During one particularly heated argument fueled by Levi's latest disappearance, Caroline lashed out. "You're never really here," she shouted, tears blurring her vision. Levi's response was a cold, calculated reply. Physical presence doesn't equate to emotional availability, Caroline. You should know that by now. The words stung, but they also held a kernel of truth. Caroline had known from the start that Levi was a closed book. Had she chosen to ignore the warnings in her haste to save her family? The realization left, her feeling foolish and trapped. Yet despite everything, there were moments, fleeting, rare, when she'd catch Levi staring at her across a room, his expression softening ever so slightly. Those moments kept her hope alive, even as logic told her to run. Caroline's relationship with Levi's world was one of constant adaptation. She learned to navigate his business associates with grace, mastering the art of polite conversation while masking her disdain for their ruthless ambitions. But beneath the surface, she observed patterns. Levi's business trips often coincided with whispers among the staff, whispers about men in dark suits waiting at the airport, about encrypted messages delivered to his study. One evening, after Levi returned from a particularly lengthy absence, Caroline noticed a new addition to his desk, a framed photograph of a younger Levi with a woman whose face had been carefully scratched out. "Who was she?" Caroline asked, before thinking. Levi's response was immediate and sharp. "No questions allowed," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The photograph was gone the next day, replaced by a stack of files. Caroline's mind raced. The husband she thought she knew was becoming a stranger by the day, and she was beginning to wonder if she'd ever truly known him at all. The emotional chasm between them reached a breaking point during a dinner party Levi hosted in honor of his colleagues. Caroline spent the evening fielding questions about her adjustment to married life, her responses polished and rehearsed. One guest, a sharp-eyed woman with a penchant for gossip, leaned in during dessert. They say you're the key to Levi's softer side, she said, her tone sugary sweet. Caroline's smile faltered. I'm afraid that's an exaggeration, she replied. The woman's gaze sharpened. Some say he's never fully recovered from his past. A tragedy, they call it. Before Caroline could respond, Levi appeared at her side. Everything's fine here, I hope, he said, his presence a buffer against the invasive curiosity. The guest retreated, but not before whispering, Be careful, dear. Some secrets are better left buried. That night, as Levi prepared for bed, Caroline confronted him. What was she talking about? She asked, her voice trembling. Levi's response was a wall of ice. The past is the past, and you're not part of it. The finality of his words left Caroline colder than the mansion's marble floors. Caroline's turning point came during a thunderstorm that left the mansion shrouded in darkness. Levi had been gone for 3 days, and the staff was on edge, their glances darting to the front door with anxious frequency. Caroline paced the living room, her nerves frayed. Where was he? Why did his absences always feel like a punishment? As lightning flashed outside, the front door burst open, and Levi strode in, drenched and disheveled. You're back, Caroline breathed, relief flooding her. Levi's response was a growl. This marriage, it's a mistake, he said, his voice raw with emotion. Caroline froze. What are you saying? She whispered. Levi ran a hand through his soaked hair. I can't keep doing this, Caroline. The lies, the charade, it's eating me alive. Caroline's heart raced. Was this the moment she'd feared? The moment when Levi walked away, leaving her family's future in ruins? You agreed to the terms, she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Levi's gaze dropped. Terms? This was never just a deal for me. The words hung in the air, charged with unspoken truths. For the first time, Caroline saw a crack in Levi's armor, a glimpse of the man beneath the billionaire's facade. But before she could respond, Levi turned and left, the door closing with a finality that echoed through the mansion. The truth was slipping out, and Caroline wasn't sure if she was ready to face what came next. Levi Schmidt's routine was as predictable as the ticking of a grandfather clock. Mornings found him in the study, sipping black coffee while reviewing financial reports, his posture rigid and unyielding. He'd depart by 7 sharp, his goodbye a curt nod or a brief, "See you tonight." Caroline often wondered if he rehearsed those moments in front of a mirror. Evenings were a ritual of polite detachment. Dinner served at precisely 7:30, conversations restricted to topics like the stock market or upcoming events. "How was your day?" Caroline would ask, her tone light. Levi's responses were measured, clinical. "Productive," he'd reply, or "The board meeting went well." Never a hint of emotion, never a glimpse into the man beneath the suit. Caroline began to suspect that beneath his tailored exterior, Levi was a stranger in a tailored suit, a man who existed in the world but never truly lived in it. The physical intimacy between them was a landscape of contradictions. Levi's touches were never unwelcome, precisely calibrated to maintain the illusion of a happy marriage. A hand on the small of her back as they entered a function, a chaste kiss on her cheek before bed. But Caroline could count on one hand the number of times she'd seen genuine warmth in his eyes. One evening, after a particularly grueling charity dinner, Levi surprised her by pouring her a glass of wine. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said, his voice neutral. Caroline smiled. "Thanks to your coaching." Levi's jaw tightened. "This isn't about coaching, Caroline. It's about survival." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. For a moment, Caroline thought she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his gaze, something raw and human. But as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by the familiar icy mask. "Rest up," he said, setting the glass down. We've got another gala in 2 days." And just like that, the moment dissolved, leaving Caroline to wonder if she'd imagined it all. Caroline's curiosity about Levi's past grew with each passing week, though she knew better than to ask outright. The staff had their own unspoken rules. Never mention Mr. Schmidt's travels, never inquire about his late-night calls. Yet hints slipped through the cracks. The housekeeper once mentioned a name in passing. "Elena," she'd said, her voice hushed. "An old acquaintance," Levi had clarified later, his tone leaving no room for further questions. Caroline found herself scouring Levi's schedule, noting the destinations he visited: Geneva, Dubai, Singapore, places that hinted at a life far removed from their current existence. One afternoon, while Levi was away, Caroline discovered a locked drawer in his desk. Her fingers hovered over it, temptation warring with fear. What secrets could be hiding behind that brass key? The answer came weeks later when she overheard Levi arguing on the phone in a language she didn't recognize. "They can't find out," he growled, his voice urgent. The fear in his tone was unmistakable. Late-night phone calls in foreign tongues. Caroline realized then that Levi's past was not just distant, it was dangerous. The emotional distance between them became a character in their marriage, a silent third party that influenced every interaction. Caroline tried filling the void with hobbies, painting, gardening, even attempting to learn French from old textbooks. But nothing dulled the ache of Levi's emotional absence. During one particularly heated argument fueled by Levi's latest disappearance, Caroline lashed out. "You're never really here," she shouted, tears blurring her vision. Levi's response was a cold, calculated reply. "Physical presence doesn't equate to emotional availability, Caroline. You should know that by now." The words stung, but they also held a kernel of truth. Caroline had known from the start that Levi was a closed book. Had she chosen to ignore the warnings in her haste to save her family? The realization left her feeling foolish and trapped. Yet despite everything, there were moments, fleeting, rare, when she'd catch Levi staring at her across a room, his expression softening ever so slightly. Those moments kept her hope alive, even as logic told her to run. Caroline's relationship with Levi's world was one of constant adaptation. She learned to navigate his business associates with grace, mastering the art of polite conversation while masking her disdain for their ruthless ambitions. But beneath the surface, she observed patterns. Levi's business trips often coincided with whispers among the staff. Whispers about men in dark suits waiting at the airport, about encrypted messages delivered to his study. One evening, after Levi returned from a particularly lengthy absence, Caroline noticed a new addition to his desk, a framed photograph of a younger Levi with a woman whose face had been carefully scratched out. "Who was she?" Caroline asked, before thinking. Levi's response was immediate and sharp. "No questions allowed," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The photograph was gone the next day, replaced by a stack of files. Caroline's mind raced. The husband she thought she knew was becoming a stranger by the day, and she was beginning to wonder if she'd ever truly known him at all. The emotional chasm between them reached a breaking point during a dinner party Levi hosted in honor of his colleagues. Caroline spent the evening fielding questions about her adjustment to married life, her responses polished and rehearsed. One guest, a sharp-eyed woman with a penchant for gossip, leaned in during dessert. "They say you're the key to Levi's softer side," she said, her tone sugary sweet. Caroline's smile faltered. "I'm afraid that's an exaggeration," she replied. The woman's gaze sharpened. "Some say he's never fully recovered from his past. A tragedy, they call it." Before Caroline could respond, Levi appeared at her side. "Everything's fine here, I hope," he said, his presence a buffer against the invasive curiosity. The guest retreated, but not before whispering, "Be careful, dear. Some secrets are better left buried." That night, as Levi prepared for bed, Caroline confronted him. What was she talking about? She asked, her voice trembling. Levi's response was a wall of ice. The past is the past, and you're not part of it. The finality of his words left Caroline colder than the mansion's marble floors. Caroline's turning point came during a thunderstorm that left the mansion shrouded in darkness. Levi had been gone for 3 days, and the staff was on edge, their glances darting to the front door with anxious frequency. Caroline paced the living room, her nerves frayed. Where was he? Why did his absences always feel like a punishment? As lightning flashed outside, the front door burst open, and Levi strode in, drenched and disheveled. "You're back," Caroline breathed, relief flooding her. Levi's response was a growl. "This marriage, it's a mistake," he said, his voice raw with emotion. Caroline froze. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Levi ran a hand through his soaked hair. "I can't keep doing this, Caroline. The lies, the charade, it's eating me alive." Caroline's heart raced. Was this the moment she'd feared? The moment when Levi walked away, leaving her family's future in ruins? "You agreed to the terms," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Levi's gaze dropped. "Terms? This was never just a deal for me." The words hung in the air, charged with unspoken truths. For the first time, Caroline saw a crack in Levi's armor, a glimpse of the man beneath the billionaire's facade. But before she could respond, Levi turned and left, the door closing with a finality that echoed through the mansion. The truth was slipping out, and Caroline wasn't sure if she was ready to face what came next. From the moment Caroline Dawson agreed to marry Levi Schmidt, the ground rules were clear. "No questions allowed," Levi had stated, his tone leaving no room for debate. It was a rule that hung over their marriage like a storm cloud, a constant reminder of the boundaries between them. Caroline learned quickly that certain topics were off limits: Levi's childhood, his family, the years before he became a billionaire. The staff reinforced this unspoken rule with their own wary glances and hurried whispers whenever Levi's past came up in conversation. But curiosity, like a persistent weed, took root in Caroline's mind. How could she not wonder about the man she'd married? The billionaire's hidden past was a mystery that begged to be solved, and Caroline was determined to uncover the truth, regardless of the cost. The mansion itself seemed to conspire to keep Levi's secrets buried. Its walls held memories of a life Caroline knew nothing about. There were rooms she'd never been invited to enter, corridors that felt forbidden. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hargrove, would often mutter about old business when certain areas of the house were mentioned. "Some doors are best left closed," she'd say, her eyes darting to Levi's office. Caroline's frustration grew with each passing day. It was as if the entire household was part of a grand conspiracy to protect Levi's past. But Caroline wasn't one to back down easily. She'd made a deal with darkness when she agreed to this marriage, and she intended to see it through, no matter how many walls she had to climb over or how many locked doors she had to pick. Caroline's opportunity came one rainy afternoon when Levi was unexpectedly called away on urgent business. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound the patter of rain against the windows. With a sense of purpose, Caroline made her way to Levi's study, the one room that had always been off limits. The door was, predictably, locked. But Caroline had been resourceful long before she became a billionaire's wife. A hairpin from her vanity, and a few deft maneuvers later, the door clicked open. The study was a revelation. Walls lined with leather-bound books, a massive mahogany desk cluttered with files, and a fireplace that added a touch of warmth to the otherwise austere room. But it was the photograph on the mantelpiece that caught Caroline's eye. A younger, Levi stood alongside a woman whose face had been meticulously scratched out. The woman's features were gone, but the intimacy of their poses suggested a deep connection. Caroline's heart raced. Who was this woman? And why had Levi gone to such lengths to erase her from his memory? As Caroline explored the study, she uncovered more clues. A stack of letters tied with a black ribbon, their contents clearly personal but too fragile to risk opening. A safe in the corner, its combination hidden but not impossible to guess. And then there was the journal, tucked away in a drawer, its pages filled with Levi's meticulous handwriting. Caroline hesitated before opening it. Was she crossing a line she couldn't come back from? The answer was yes, but she opened it anyway. The entries were brief, almost cryptic. References to the deal, the shadow, and the price. Each word felt like a piece of a puzzle she was only beginning to assemble. The journal ended abruptly, the final entry dated 3 months before their marriage. "It's time to move forward," Levi had written. "No looking back." Caroline's hands shook. What had Levi done to ensure he didn't look back, and how did her marriage fit into this carefully constructed narrative? The consequences of Caroline's actions became clear that evening. Levi returned sooner than expected, his presence filling the study with an electric tension. "You shouldn't be in here," he said, his voice deceptively calm. Caroline stood her ground, the journal clutched to her chest. "I need answers," she said, her voice steady despite the fear pooling in her stomach. Levi's gaze hardened. "Some secrets are too dangerous to uncover," he warned. "This isn't just about you or me. It's about people's lives." Caroline's mind raced. Was he threatening her? Protecting her? The line between the two was frustratingly blurry. "I deserve to know the truth," she insisted. Levi stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "The truth," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "is a luxury we can't afford." The air between them crackled with unspoken words. Caroline realized then that she'd opened a door she couldn't close, and whatever came next would change their marriage forever. The days following Caroline's discovery in the study were charged with an unspoken tension. Levi's behavior shifted subtly. He became more distant, his already cold demeanor now verging on hostile. The staff noticed too, their glances shifting, from curiosity to concern. Mrs. Hargrove approached Caroline one afternoon, her voice hushed. "Be careful, Mrs. Schmidt," she whispered. "Some secrets are better left buried." Caroline's response was a hollow laugh. Too late for that. The housekeeper's warning lingered, but Caroline's resolve didn't waver. She'd come too far to turn back now. The truth was within reach, and she'd endure whatever Levi threw at her to uncover it. Even if it meant risking everything, their marriage, her family's security, her own safety. The past was a shadow Levi had tried to outrun, but Caroline was determined to drag it into the light, no matter the cost. And as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, she realized that the man she'd married was not the man she thought she knew. The truth was darker, more twisted, and far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. Caroline's final push for answers came during a rare moment of vulnerability from Levi. They were in the study again, the air thick with unresolved tension. Levi stared into the fireplace, his posture rigid. "You're going to keep pushing until you break us, aren't you?" he said, his voice devoid of accusation, but heavy with resignation. Caroline didn't flinch. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. "I need to know." Levi turned to face her, his eyes revealing a flicker of the pain he'd long hidden. "Fine," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "But prepare yourself. The truth isn't pretty." And with those words, Levi began to unravel the layers of his past, a past tied to betrayal, danger, and perhaps even death. Caroline listened, her heart sinking with each revelation. The man she'd married was a stranger to her, and the life they'd built together was built on quicksand. As Levi's story unfolded, Caroline realized that their marriage was not just a deal with darkness, it was a dance with the devil himself. And she was beginning to wonder if she'd survive the final twirl. The mansion's staff moved like ghosts through the grand halls, their conversations hushed and fleeting. Mrs. Hargrove, the housekeeper with a decade of loyalty to Levi, often paused mid-sweep to steal anxious glances at Caroline. The butler, Mr. Reed, would clear his throat pointedly whenever Caroline lingered near Levi's study. Even the newest maid, Clara, whose chatter usually filled the air, fell silent when Levi's name was mentioned. The whispers were a constant hum in the background, a reminder that Caroline was an outsider in this world she'd married into. "They've been with him since before the incident," Clara once muttered, before clamping her hand over her mouth. "Sorry, Mrs. Schmidt. I shouldn't have said anything." Caroline's curiosity sharpened. What incident? And why did the staff act as though Levi's past was a fragile relic that might shatter if spoken of too loudly? The halls themselves seemed to hold their breath. Portraits of Levi's ancestors stared down with judgmental eyes, their oil-painted mouths sealed in eternal disapproval. Caroline often passed by a specific painting, a stern man in military uniform, his gaze following her as she moved. "That's Levi's father," Mrs. Hargrove had said one day, her voice tinged with pity. "A hard man, God rest his soul. Levi never quite lived up to his expectations." Caroline would pause, studying the painting. Was Levi's coldness a learned trait, a rebellion against a father's legacy? The more she observed, the more she noticed the subtle divisions in the household staff. The older members, Mrs. Hargrove, Mr. Reed, walked on eggshells around Levi, their loyalty absolute. The newer staff, like Clara, seemed both wary and curious, their eyes drawn to Caroline, as if she held answers they couldn't voice. "The house has a memory," Clara whispered one afternoon, her voice barely audible. "It remembers what we try to forget." Caroline's pulse quickened. What was the house remembering? Caroline's relationship with the staff became a battleground of unspoken alliances. During a late-night tea break in the kitchen, Clara spilled her tea and cursed under her breath. "Sorry, Mrs. Schmidt," she said, her face red. "It's just these walls. They feel alive sometimes, like they're watching us." Caroline leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Clara's eyes darted to the door, ensuring they were alone. "There are things that happen here. Doors slamming when no one's around, footsteps in empty hallways. And Mr. Reed says it's just the old house settling, but I know better." Caroline's mind raced. Were these simply tales to pass the time, or was there truth in Clara's whispers? The mansion's secrets were like a living entity, twisting and turning beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. And as Caroline delved deeper, she realized that the staff's gossip was a double-edged sword, offering clues while simultaneously burying her in a web of half-truths. One evening, as Caroline descended the grand staircase, she overheard a conversation between Mr. Reed and Mrs. Hargrove. Their voices were low, but the urgency was unmistakable. "He's getting careless," Mrs. Hargrove hissed. "Those late-night calls, they're dangerous." Mr. Reed's response was a warning. "The mistress shouldn't know about this. It's not her place." "But she's asking questions, Reed. Questions about his past, about the mansion's history." Caroline froze. Was the housekeeper referring to her? Did they know she was searching for answers? Her heart pounded as she inched closer, hidden by the staircase's curve. "Levi's always been a private man," Mr. Reed said. "But this feels different. Desperate, almost." Mrs. Hargrove sighed. "I fear for him, and for the mistress. She's in over her head." Their voices trailed off as they moved away, leaving Caroline with a mix of fear and determination. The staff's whispers confirmed what she'd suspected. The house held secrets, and Levi was at the center of it all. But what kind of secrets? And how deep did they run? The breakthrough came during a mansion-wide power outage. Candles were quickly lit, their flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls. The staff moved efficiently, their familiarity with the house evident even in darkness. Caroline wandered the halls, her candle held high, until she reached the east wing, a part of the house she'd rarely visited. There, in the dim light, she noticed a door she'd never seen before, half hidden behind an ancient tapestry depicting a family she didn't recognize. "That's the old nursery," Mrs. Hargrove said from behind her, making Caroline jump. "It's been sealed for years." Caroline's curiosity was piqued. "Why?" she asked, though she feared the answer. Mrs. Hargrove's expression darkened. "It's where Levi's mother died. A tragic accident," they said. "But I've always wondered." Her voice trailed off, and she shook her head. "Not my story to tell." Caroline's heart raced. A locked office, a hidden room, the mansion was a labyrinth of secrets, each one bringing her closer to understanding Levi's hidden past. But as she stood there, the weight of Mrs. Hargrove's unspoken words hung in the air. Some secrets were buried for a reason, and digging them up might unleash consequences neither Caroline nor Levi was prepared to face. The staff's whispers reached a fever pitch after Levi returned from a particularly secretive trip. His demeanor had shifted, his usual control frayed at the edges, his temper quick to flare. Mrs. Hargrove found him in the study one afternoon, his fist pounding the desk. "They're getting too close," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Caroline, who'd been pretending to jongle flowers in the hallway, froze. Getting too close to what? To him? To her? That night, as the household settled into uneasy sleep, Caroline slipped into Levi's study, the journal she'd discovered earlier clutched in her hand. Under the flickering candlelight, she read entries detailing meetings in shadowy locations, transactions in untraceable currency, and a name that sent a chill down her spine: Victor Radek. The name meant nothing to her, but its frequency in Levi's journal suggested significance. The staff's whispers, the locked doors, the hidden rooms. It all began to make a twisted kind of sense. Levi wasn't just hiding a past, he was running from it. And Caroline, bound to him by marriage and circumstance, was being dragged along for the ride. Caroline's final encounter with the staff's secrets came during a midnight stroll through the gardens. The moon was hidden behind clouds, casting the mansion in an otherworldly darkness. She was startled to find Clara waiting for her near the rose arbor, a bundle of documents clutched to her chest. "I had to tell you," Clara whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "I found these in the study while cleaning. They're about you." Caroline's breath caught. The documents were financial records, legal filings, evidence of Levi's involvement in something far darker than she'd imagined. "He's using you, Mrs. Schmidt," Clara said, her voice trembling. "Your family's debt was just the beginning. He's leveraging your marriage for something else." Before Caroline could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows. Levi, his presence a wall of controlled fury. "Clara," he said, his voice a dangerous whisper. "You've made a grave mistake." The young maid paled, dropping the documents and fleeing. Levi turned to Caroline, his gaze piercing. "We need to talk," he said, extending a hand. Caroline stared at it, her mind racing. The staff's whispers, the hidden rooms, the late night calls, all of it converged in this moment. She took his hand, not knowing if she was walking into the truth or walking into a trap. As they walked back toward the mansion, the weight of Levi's hidden past settled between them like a third presence, heavy and unavoidable. Caroline's heart hammered as she stood before the heavy oak door of Levi's office, the key grasped tightly in her trembling hand. She'd found it earlier that day, tucked into Levi's suit jacket while she was organizing his closet, a flimsy excuse to snoop. But it had worked. The key felt like a live wire in her palm. Every fiber of her being screamed that she shouldn't go through with this, that respect for privacy was the backbone of any relationship. But this wasn't a normal relationship. This was a marriage built on a deal with darkness, and Caroline was determined to drag the light into it, even if it scorched them both. "Here goes nothing," she whispered, the key turning with a click that echoed deafeningly in the silent mansion. The office was a symphony of control. Walls lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves housing leather-bound volumes, a massive mahogany desk that could have seated 6 comfortably, and a fireplace that crackled with a warmth the rest of the mansion never seemed to possess. But it was the air that struck Caroline first, an almost physical sense of contained power, as if the room itself had absorbed Levi's relentless energy. She moved to the desk, her fingers brushing over the polished surface. A stack of documents sat neatly arranged, their crisp edges a testament to Levi's obsession with order. Caroline hesitated, then reached for the top file. "Corporate Acquisitions, Schmidt Industries," she read aloud, her voice swallowed by the room's vastness. Nothing out of the ordinary, until she flipped to the 3rd page. A name jumped out at her, Elena Voss. Her breath caught. She'd heard the name before, in the housekeeper's whispered conversations, in Levi's curt dismissals. "Project Eclipse Confidential," the document continued, detailing transactions in sums that made Caroline's head spin. She glanced up, half expecting Levi to materialize in the doorway, his icy stare boring into her. But the room remained hers, at least for now. Caroline's exploration led her to the bookshelves, their towering presence a mix of intimidating and inviting. She ran her fingers along the spines, classics intermingled with financial tomes, a reflection of Levi's dual nature. But it was a gap between 2 books that caught her eye, a slight misalignment that screamed out of place. With a careful tug, she pulled a hidden compartment free, revealing a small metal box. Her pulse raced. Inside lay a collection of Polaroids, their edges curling with age. Each photo featured Levi, younger and less guarded, with a woman whose face was as familiar as it was unsettling. "Elena," Caroline whispered, recognition dawning. The photos told a story of intimacy, shared laughter, quiet moments, a connection that felt achingly real. But in the final photo, Elena's face was scratched out viciously, the image marred by Levi's hand. Caroline's stomach churned. Who was she? And why did Levi want her erased from his past? The questions piled up like unpaid debts, each one clamoring for attention. The desk's surface held one final clue, a sleek laptop, its screen dark and foreboding. Caroline hesitated. Passwords were a last resort. Hacking into Levi's private files felt like crossing a Rubicon she couldn't uncross. But the curiosity was a living thing inside her, gnawing at her resolve. "Worth a shot," she muttered, tapping the power button. The screen flickered to life, demanding a password. Caroline glanced around the room, her eyes landing on a framed photo of Levi and his parents, a family portrait as stiff and formal as their relationship had presumably been. "Family," she typed, the word feeling both right and wrong. The laptop beeped, granting access. Caroline's breath hitched. The desktop was a meticulously organized array of folders, each labeled with clinical precision. But it was the personal folder that drew her in, its name a siren's call. Inside lay a series of emails, their subject lines cryptic and charged. "The deal," one read, its contents detailing a transaction that made Caroline's blood run cold. Levi had orchestrated a takeover of a smaller company, not just a business move, but one laced with blackmail and coercion. "Love paid in pain," she whispered, the reality of Levi's hidden past crashing over her. This was no ordinary billionaire. This was a man who'd built his empire on the bones of others, and she, Caroline, was somehow tangled in his web. As Caroline scrolled deeper, she uncovered a pattern, a rhythm to Levi's life that pulsed just beneath the surface of respectability. The late-night calls, the mysterious trips, the encrypted messages, it all fell into place with terrifying clarity. Levi wasn't just hiding a past, he was actively managing it, like a gardener tending to poisonous weeds. And she was beginning to see that her marriage was just another transaction in his ledger, a marriage with a price. The emails revealed that Levi had leveraged her family's debt not just to secure their silence, but to weave her into his narrative of control. "She's my wife. Questioning her is questioning me," read one message, its tone as cold as Levi's most detached moments. Caroline's hands shook. She was a pawn in his game, an asset to be deployed when necessary. The realization burned, but it also ignited something within her, a spark of defiance she hadn't known was there. She wasn't just going to uncover Levi's secrets, she was going to survive them. The sound of footsteps in the hallway snapped Caroline back to reality. She froze, her eyes darting to the door. Levi's return had come sooner than expected, his presence announced by the distinct cadence of his polished shoes against the marble floor. With trembling fingers, Caroline closed the laptop and slid it back into its niche. She hadn't found all the answers she'd hoped for, but what she'd uncovered was enough, a foundation to build on, a thread to follow deeper into the maze of Levi's hidden life. As the door creaked open, Caroline turned, her expression a mask of innocence. "I was just admiring your collection," she said, gesturing to the bookshelves. Levi's eyes narrowed, his gaze sweeping the room for signs of disturbance. "Is that so?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. Caroline forced a smile. "It's impressive. I never took you for a reader of War and Peace." The corner of Levi's mouth twitched, a flicker of the man beneath the mask. "People are full of surprises, Caroline." His response hung between them, a challenge and a promise. Caroline's mind raced. How much did he know? Had he seen the slightly ajar drawer, the disturbed files? The uncertainty was a knife's edge, but she balanced on it gracefully. "I guess they are," she replied, her voice steady, despite the storm brewing inside her. As Levi turned back to his desk, Caroline's resolve solidified. She'd walk this path, no matter where it led, even if it meant confrontations, revelations, and the kind of truth that could destroy everything she'd worked to build. Caroline's fingers trembled as she sifted through the documents in Levi's laptop, each file a piece of a puzzle that was slowly taking shape. The air in the study felt thick, charged with the weight of secrets uncovered. She'd been searching for hours, her eyes straining in the dim light until she stumbled upon a folder labeled Confidential. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it, the mother lode. Inside, a single document stood out, a marriage certificate. Her breath hitched. The names read, Levi Schmidt and Elena Voss. The date was 10 years prior. Caroline's mind reeled. Levi had been married before? Why had he never mentioned this? The room spun around her as she clicked to open another file. A photo emerged, a younger Levi and Elena, their arms wrapped around each other, smiles radiating joy. The image was a knife to Caroline's chest. This was the woman from the Polaroids, the one whose face Levi had scratched out. Panic rose in Caroline's throat. What else had Levi hidden from her? Caroline's thoughts raced as she dug deeper. Bank statements, property records, emails, all laced with references to Elena. Levi's financial transactions told a story of secret support, of funds transferred to offshore accounts linked to a name Caroline now knew all too well. Her hands shook as she pieced together the timeline. Levi and Elena had been together for years, their relationship a carefully guarded secret. The marriage had ended abruptly, the divorce records marked confidential and filled with redacted details. But it wasn't the divorce that sent chills down Caroline's spine. It was the notation at the bottom of the document, deceased. Elena Voss had died 3 years ago. Under mysterious circumstances, the records hinted. Caroline's blood ran cold. Levi's late-night phone calls, the foreign languages he used. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just about a hidden past. It was about a life Levi had tried to erase, and Caroline was beginning to understand that she was tangled in a web far darker than she'd imagined. The sound of Levi's key in the front door sent Caroline's heart into overdrive. She scrambled to close the laptop, her movements frantic. The mansion seemed to hold its breath as Levi's footsteps echoed through the halls. He entered the study, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. "You're pale," he said, his voice deceptively calm. Caroline forced a smile. "Just tired," she lied, her voice trembling. Levi's gaze swept the room, landing on the slightly disheveled desk. "Everything in its place, Caroline," he said, his tone a warning. "Or are you getting curious?" Caroline's breath hitched. "I was just looking for a book." Levi stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "Curiosity killed. The cat, you know." The threat was veiled but clear. "I'm careful," she whispered, her resolve hardening. Levi's lips curled into a humorless smile. "Careful isn't the word I'd use." The air between them crackled with unspoken words. Caroline knew she'd crossed a line, but there was no turning back now. The truth was within reach, and she'd endure whatever Levi threw at her to uncover it. Caroline's mind raced as she tried to process the revelation. Levi had been married to Elena, a fact he'd gone to great lengths to hide. But why? Was it shame, regret, or something far more sinister? The staff's whispers, the locked doors, the hidden rooms, it all began to make a twisted kind of sense. Levi's coldness, his detachment, his meticulously controlled life, they were all symptoms of a man running from his past. And Caroline, bound to him by marriage and circumstance, was being dragged along for the ride. That night, as Levi prepared for bed, Caroline confronted him. "Who was Elena?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Levi's response was immediate. "No questions allowed," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. But Caroline refused to back down. "She was your wife," she pressed. Levi's gaze dropped. "She's dead," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "And she stays that way." The finality of his words left Caroline colder than the mansion's marble floors. The truth was slipping out, and there was no turning back. The days following Caroline's discovery were charged with an unspoken tension. Levi's behavior shifted subtly. He became more distant, his already cold demeanor now verging on hostile. The staff noticed too, their glances shifting from curiosity to concern. Mrs. Hargrove approached Caroline one afternoon, her voice hushed. "Be careful, Mrs. Schmidt," she whispered. "Some secrets are better left buried." Caroline's response was a hollow laugh. Too late for that. The housekeeper's warning lingered, but Caroline's resolve didn't waver. She'd come too far to turn back now. The truth was within reach, and she'd endure whatever Levi threw at her to uncover it, even if it meant risking everything: their marriage, her family's security, her own safety. The past was a shadow Levi had tried to outrun, but Caroline was determined to drag it into the light, no matter the cost. And as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, she realized that the man she'd married was not the man she thought she knew. The truth was darker, more twisted, and far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. Caroline's final push for answers came during a rare moment of vulnerability from Levi. They were in the study again, the air thick with unresolved tension. Levi stared into the fireplace, his posture rigid. "You're going to keep pushing until you break us, aren't you?" he said, his voice devoid of accusation but heavy with resignation. Caroline didn't flinch. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. "I need to know." Levi turned to face her, his eyes revealing a flicker of the pain he'd long hidden. "Fine," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "But prepare yourself. The truth isn't pretty." And with those words, Levi began to unravel the layers of his past, a past tied to betrayal, danger, and perhaps even death. Caroline listened, her heart sinking with each revelation. The man she'd married was a stranger to her, and the life they'd built together was built on quicksand. As Levi's story unfolded, Caroline realized that their marriage was not just a deal with darkness, it was a dance with the devil himself. And she was beginning to wonder if she'd survive the final twirl. The mansion fell silent after midnight. The staff long retired, and the world outside wrapped in darkness. It was during these hours that Levi's true nature emerged, a man transformed by shadows and secrecy. Caroline would lie awake, listening to the distant murmurs from his study, her mind racing with questions. The calls always came after dark, Levi's voice dropping into languages Caroline didn't recognize. Russian, she thought once. Maybe German another time. The urgency in his tone was unmistakable, his words sharp and clipped. "They're getting too close," she overheard one night, her heart pounding as she pressed her ear against the study door. "The deal must be secured before the end of the month." The weight of those words settled in Caroline's stomach. Levi wasn't just a businessman. He was a man with stakes so high they blurred the line between legal and lethal. And she, bound to him by marriage, was caught in the crossfire of a world she never chose. One night, curiosity got the better of Caroline. She waited until Levi's study light flickered on, then slipped from her room, her bare feet silent on the polished floors. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light escaping into the hallway. She positioned herself just out of sight, her breath held as Levi's voice carried through the crack. "Victor, we need to move faster," he said, the name sending a chill down Caroline's spine. Victor Radek, the name from the journal. The man Levi had mentioned in passing, dismissing him as an old associate. But the tension in Levi's voice told a different story. This was no casual acquaintance. This was danger. Caroline's mind raced. Victor was connected to Elena's death. She was certain of it. The pieces were aligning, each revelation darker than the last. Levi's late-night calls were threads in a tapestry of deceit, and Caroline was determined to unravel them, no matter the cost. The following day, Levi's demeanor shifted subtly. He was more distant, his already cold exterior now verging on hostile. During breakfast, he barely acknowledged Caroline, his responses to her questions curt and dismissive. "I have meetings all day," he said, rising abruptly from the table. "Don't wait up." Caroline's frustration simmered. "Can't you spare 5 minutes for a conversation?" she asked, her voice tinged with desperation. Levi paused, his gaze locking onto hers. "Conversations lead to questions," he said, his tone a warning. "And questions lead to answers neither of us can afford." The air between them crackled with unspoken truths. Caroline realized then that Levi's coldness was a shield, a defense mechanism against the past he was, desperately trying to outrun. But she also knew that her silence would be her prison, and she refused to be locked away in a marriage of secrets. Caroline's opportunity came during one of Levi's longer absences. She'd grown adept at navigating his study in the dark, her fingers finding the familiar path to his desk. The laptop was still powered on, the screen displaying an encrypted message thread. Her heart raced as she leaned closer. "The package must be delivered by Friday," read one message, its sender identified only by a string of numbers. Another message followed. "The authorities are asking questions. Handle it discreetly." Caroline's hands shook. This wasn't business. Not the kind Levi had shown her, at least. This was something else entirely. Something that made her question everything she thought she knew about her husband. She snapped a photo of the screen with her phone, her mind racing. Levi's late-night calls were just the tip of the iceberg. His entire life was a carefully constructed lie, and she was beginning to understand that her marriage was built on the same unstable foundation. The staff's behavior added another layer to the mystery. Mrs. Hargrove moved through the mansion with the air of someone burdened by unspoken knowledge. "He's not the man you think he is," she muttered one afternoon, her voice hushed. "But you already knew that, didn't you?" Caroline's response was a hollow laugh. "I thought I did." The housekeeper's warning lingered, but Caroline's resolve didn't waver. She'd come too far to turn back now. The truth was within reach, and she'd endure whatever Levi threw at her to uncover it. Even if it meant risking everything, their marriage, her family's security, her own safety. The past was a shadow Levi had tried to outrun, but Caroline was determined to drag it into the light, no matter the cost. And as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, she realized that the man she'd married was not the man she thought she knew. The truth was darker, more twisted, and far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. The breakthrough came during a mansion-wide power outage. Candles were quickly lit, their flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls. The staff moved efficiently, their familiarity with the house evident even in darkness. Caroline wandered the halls, her candle held high, until she reached the east wing, a part of the house she'd rarely visited. There, in the dim light, she noticed a door she'd never seen before, half hidden behind an ancient tapestry depicting a family she didn't recognize. "That's the old nursery," Mrs. Hargrove said from behind her, making Caroline jump. "It's been sealed for years." Caroline's curiosity was piqued. "Why?" she asked, though she feared the answer. Mrs. Hargrove's expression darkened. "It's where Levi's mother died. A tragic accident, they said. But I've always wondered—" Her voice trailed off and she shook her head. "Not my story to tell." Caroline's heart raced. A locked office, a hidden room, the mansion, was a labyrinth of secrets, each one bringing her closer to understanding Levi's hidden past. But as she stood there, the weight of Mrs. Hargrove's unspoken words hung in the air. Some secrets were buried for a reason, and digging them up might unleash consequences neither Caroline nor Levi was prepared to face. Caroline's final encounter with Levi's secrets came during a midnight stroll through the gardens. The moon was hidden behind clouds, casting the mansion in an otherworldly darkness. She was startled to find Clara waiting for her near the rose arbor, a bundle of documents clutched to her chest. "I had to tell you," Clara whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "I found these in the study while cleaning. They're about you." Caroline's breath caught. The documents were financial records, legal filings, evidence of Levi's involvement in something far darker than she'd imagined. "He's using you, Mrs. Schmidt," Clara said, her voice trembling. "Your family's debt was just the beginning. He's leveraging your marriage for something else." Before Caroline could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows. Levi, his presence a wall of controlled fury. "Clara," he said, his voice a dangerous whisper, "you've made a grave mistake." The young maid paled, dropping the documents and fleeing. Levi turned to Caroline, his gaze piercing. "We need to talk," he said, extending a hand. Caroline stared at it, her mind racing. The staff's whispers, the hidden rooms, the late night calls. All of it converged in this moment. She took his hand, not knowing if she was walking into the truth or walking into a trap. As they walked back toward the mansion, the weight of Levi's hidden past settled between them like a third presence, heavy and unavoidable. The confrontation happened on a night when the mansion felt particularly empty, the staff having taken the evening off for some uncharacteristic reason. Levi was in the study as usual, his back to the door, as he stared out the window at the rain-soaked gardens. Caroline stood in the doorway for a long moment, gathering her courage. The evidence she'd uncovered weighed heavily in her mind. Elena's marriage certificate, the financial records, the encrypted messages. She couldn't ignore it any longer. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Levi turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "About what?" he asked, his tone deceptively calm. Caroline stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "About everything," she said. "About Elena, about the money, about the lies." Levi's posture stiffened, but he said nothing. Caroline pressed on. "I found the marriage certificate, Levi. I know about her. I know she's dead." The room fell silent, the only sound the rain pelting against the windows. Levi's jaw tightened. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said finally, his voice low. Caroline's heart raced, but she held her ground. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Levi's gaze dropped to the desk, where a stack of files lay neatly arranged. "It's in the past," he said, avoiding her eyes. "It doesn't matter anymore." But Caroline could see the flicker of pain behind his carefully constructed mask. "It matters to me," she insisted. "You trusted me with nothing, Levi. How can we have a marriage without trust?" Levi's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "Trust is a luxury we can't afford," he said, his voice harsh. "This isn't a normal marriage, Caroline. It was never meant to be." The words cut deep, but Caroline refused to back down. "Maybe not," she said, her voice softening. "But I'm not the person you think I am, Levi. I won't stand by while you shut me out." For a long moment, Levi stared at her, his expression a mix of anger and something else, something that looked suspiciously like vulnerability. Then, with a sharp exhale, he ran a hand through his hair. "You want the truth?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. "Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you." He turned back to the window, his shoulders slumping as if under the weight of unseen burdens. "I'll tell you everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But prepare yourself. The truth isn't kind." As Levi began to speak, Caroline listened, her heart aching with each revelation. He told her about his childhood, a loveless upbringing with a father who saw him only as a means to an end. He spoke of Elena, his first love, the woman he'd married in secret, only to lose her to a world of danger and betrayal. "She was killed," he said, his voice trembling, "because of me, because of the deals I made." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of guilt and loss. Caroline's breath caught. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. Levi flinched at her touch, then slowly lowered his guard, allowing her to pull him into an embrace. "I've been running from this for so long," he murmured into her hair. "I didn't want you to get hurt." The moment was fragile, a crack in Levi's armor that let through a sliver of light. But as the night wore on, Caroline realized that this was only the beginning. The truth was a tangled web, and they were only just starting to unravel it. Levi's past was a shadow that loomed over them, threatening to consume everything they'd built. But for the first time, Caroline felt a flicker of hope, that maybe, just maybe, they could face it together. The journey ahead would be fraught, with danger and uncertainty, but in that moment, as they stood wrapped in each other's arms, Caroline knew that they had taken the first step toward healing. The masks were coming off, one by one, and whatever came next, they would face it together. Caroline's mind raced as Levi's story unfolded. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. Elena's death, the secretive transactions, the late-night calls. It was a tapestry of deceit and danger, and Caroline was beginning to understand that Levi's coldness wasn't just a choice. It was a shield against a past that threatened to destroy him. "You're not alone," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here with you." Levi's response was a whisper. "I don't deserve your kindness." But Caroline could see the flicker of hope in his eyes, a hope that mirrored her own. They stood there, two broken souls trying to find their way in the darkness. And for the first time, Caroline allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. The road would be long and fraught with peril, but they had each other. And in that, Caroline found a strength she hadn't known she possessed.
The days following the confrontation were charged with a fragile tension. Levi became more open, albeit slowly, his usual detachment replaced by moments of vulnerability that Caroline cherished. They spent hours in the study, Levi recounting
his past in fragmented stories, Caroline listening with a mix of heartbreak and resolve. "I never wanted to involve you in this," Levi said one evening, his voice raw with emotion. "But now you're tangled in it whether I like it or not." Caroline took his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "We'll face it together," she promised. Levi's gaze met hers, a flicker of warmth in his eyes that Caroline hadn't seen before. "I'm holding you to that," he said, his voice breaking slightly. And as they sat there, the weight of Levi's past hanging between them like a living entity, Caroline realized that their marriage was no longer just a deal with darkness. It was a beacon of hope in the storm. And she was ready to fight, not just for her family, but for Levi as well, from his past and from himself. The days following the confrontation were a blur of revelations and raw emotions. Levi's walls began to crumble, piece by piece, revealing a past that was darker than Caroline had ever imagined. They sat for hours in the study, Levi's voice often breaking as he spoke of his childhood, a loveless existence under the shadow of a father who saw him only as a means to an end. His father's ambition had been a double-edged sword, driving Levi to build an empire while leaving emotional scars that never healed. "He wanted power," Levi said one evening, his gaze distant. "And I became his weapon." Caroline listened, her heart aching with each word. But it was the story of Elena that cut deepest. Levi's first love, the woman he'd married in secret, had been dragged into the dangerous world Levi had built. "She didn't choose this life," Levi said, his voice trembling. "I pulled her into it." Elena had been involved in one of Levi's risky business ventures. A venture that had gone horribly wrong. She'd been targeted by enemies Levi had made along the way, her death a brutal message meant to warn him. "Her blood is on my hands," Levi whispered, his words heavy with guilt. "I should have protected her." Caroline's eyes filled with tears as she realized the depth of Levi's pain. This was the source of his coldness, his detachment, the ghost of Elena haunting every decision he'd made since. The truth continued to surface in fragments. Levi revealed that Elena's death had driven him to exact revenge, leading to a series of dangerous alliances and covert operations. "I became the very thing I hated," he said, his voice filled with self-loathing. "A monster to honor a memory." Caroline's mind raced as she connected the dots. Levi's late-night calls, the foreign languages, the mysterious trips. They were all part of a web of retribution and secrecy that Levi had woven around himself. "You're still in danger," Caroline realized aloud. Levi nodded, his expression grim. "And now, so are you." The weight of his words settled between them like a physical presence. Caroline's resolve hardened. She couldn't undo the past, but she could help Levi face it. "We'll get through this together," she said, taking his hand. Levi's gaze met hers, a flicker of hope in his eyes that Caroline hadn't seen before. "I don't deserve your kindness," he murmured. "Maybe not," Caroline replied, "but I choose to be kind anyway." The moment was fragile, a crack in Levi's armor that let through a sliver of light. They were still navigating the storm of his past, but for the first time, Caroline felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find peace amid the chaos. As days turned into weeks, the danger Levi had spoken of began to calm in. Unmarked cars appeared outside the mansion, their occupants watching with unsettling intensity. Late at night, Caroline would wake to find Levi gone, his study light on and the phone to his ear. "They're getting closer," he'd say in those foreign tongues, his voice urgent. The staff grew tense, their whispered conversations filled with fear. Mrs. Hargrove approached Caroline one evening, her voice hushed. "The past is a hungry ghost," she warned. "It won't rest until it's fed." Caroline's response was a determined nod. "We'll face it together." The words felt like a vow, not just to Levi, but to herself. She would not be a victim of the shadows Levi had tried to outrun. The turning point came during a charity gala Levi had organized, a grand event meant to showcase their perfect marriage to the world. Caroline stood at Levi's side, her smile practiced and bright, as they greeted guests and posed for photos. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Midway through the evening, a reporter cornered Caroline, her questions sharp and probing. "Rumors are swirling about your husband's past," the woman said, her pen poised. "Any truth to them?" Caroline's heart raced, but she forced a smile. "Levi's past is just that, his past. We're focused on the future." The reporter's gaze sharpened. "Some say it's catching up to him." Before Caroline could respond, Levi appeared at her side, his presence a shield. "My wife and I don't entertain rumors," he said, his tone leaving no room for further inquiry. The reporter retreated, but the damage was done. The questions were out there, and they wouldn't stay buried for long. That night, as the mansion fell silent, Levi confronted Caroline in their bedroom. "It's getting worse," he said, his voice low. "The people from my past, they're not just rumors anymore. They're real, and they're here." Caroline's mind raced. "What do we do?" Levi's gaze dropped. "We prepare." The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Caroline knew that preparation meant facing dangers they couldn't yet comprehend. But as she stood beside Levi, the weight of his past pressing down on them both, she realized that their marriage had become something neither of them had anticipated. A partnership forged not just in convenience, but in survival. And whatever came next, they would face it together. Caroline Dawson's world came crashing down the morning the headlines broke. "Billionaire's wife at the center of deadly conspiracy," screamed the front page of every major newspaper. Photographs of her and Levi at charity events, their smiles now seeming forced and artificial, filled the tabloids. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates, their microphones thrust through the iron bars, demanding answers Caroline didn't have. "Mrs. Schmidt, can you comment on your husband's alleged ties to organized crime?" one shouted as she tried to slip out for groceries. Caroline's heart raced. This wasn't just about Levi anymore. This was about her family. Levi's past had become a roaring storm, and she and her loved ones were caught in the eye of it. The reporters followed, her everywhere. Their cars trailed hers through the city streets, their lenses clicking as she visited her family. Timmy, her younger brother, clung to her leg, his eyes wide with fear. "Are they going to take you away?" he whispered. Caroline's throat tightened. "No, buddy, I'm right here," she promised, though she wasn't so sure herself. Her mother's hands shook as she prepared tea, the news playing on a loop in the background. "This is all my fault," Caroline murmured, guilt eating at her. Her mother's response was swift. "Don't you dare say that. You did what you had to do to save us. None of this is your fault." But as the cameras flashed outside their windows, Caroline wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Levi was nowhere to be found. He'd disappeared the moment the story broke, leaving Caroline to fend for herself. "He'll be back," she told her family, though doubt gnawed at her. Days turned into a week, and still no word. The reporters grew bolder, their questions more invasive. "Is your husband a murderer, Mrs. Schmidt?" one asked, holding up a grainy photo of Levi with a man whose face had been pixelated. Caroline's blood ran cold. That night, she received a call from an anonymous number. Back off, or your family gets hurt, the voice warned, the threat laced with menace. Caroline's knees buckled. This was worse than she'd feared. Levi's past wasn't just knocking at their door, it was kicking it down. Desperation drove Caroline to take action. She hired a lawyer, a sharp-tongued woman named Ms. Chen who specialized in high-profile scandals. "We need to control the narrative," Ms. Chen said, her eyes scanning the room for potential leaks. "Or they will." Caroline nodded, her mind racing. How? The lawyer's response was a media strategy that involved carefully timed interviews and public appearances. "We'll paint you as a victim," Ms. Chen explained. "Someone dragged into this mess through no fault of her own." But as the plan unfolded, Caroline realized it required her to lie. Again. "Is this who I am now?" she asked herself in the mirror one night, her reflection staring back with hollow eyes. The line between truth and survival was blurring, and Caroline wasn't sure she could find her way back. The situation spiraled when Timmy was cornered after school by a reporter pretending to be a parent. "Just a few questions for your sister, sweetie," the woman had said, her microphone hidden in her purse. Timmy fled in terror, and Caroline was forced to pull him out of school, homeschooling him in the mansion's library. The staff, usually so loyal, began to whisper. Mrs. Hargrove cornered Caroline one afternoon. "This isn't safe," she said, her voice trembling. "For any of us." Caroline's response was a hollow laugh. "Safety left the building the day I said I do to Levi Schmidt." The housekeeper's pitying gaze followed her as she walked away, the weight of her choices pressing down like a physical force. Caroline's breaking point came when her father's medical center was vandalized, graffiti smeared across the B. Walls accusing him of being in league with a criminal billionaire. Patients canceled appointments, donors withdrew support. Her father, weak from chemotherapy, collapsed in his office weeping. "I can't fight this," he whispered, his voice breaking. Caroline's fury ignited. "Then I'll fight for you," she vowed, her voice steady. That night, she packed a bag and left the mansion, heading to the one place she hoped to find answers, the old family cottage where Levi had first approached her. As she drove through the rainy countryside, determination hardened her resolve. She would confront Levi wherever he was hiding. She would make him fix this, or she would fix it herself. The cottage was dark when Caroline arrived, the windows reflecting the stormy sky. She knocked, her heart pounding, and was greeted by Levi's unexpected presence. He looked disheveled, his usual pristine appearance replaced by stubble and bloodshot eyes. "You came," he said, surprise coloring his voice. Caroline pushed past him, her anger barely contained. "Look what your past has done," she shouted, waving a photo of her vandalized family home. Levi's expression darkened. "I never wanted this for you," he said, his voice low. "But running won't help, Caroline. It'll follow you wherever you go." The words hung between them, a challenge and a promise. Caroline's mind raced. She'd come seeking answers, but what she found was a crossroads. Fight or flee. Protect her family or protect Levi. And whatever choice she made, the world was watching, ready to tear her down. The old family cottage stood silent against the storm, its windows reflecting the turmoil in Caroline's heart. Levi waited inside, the flickering fireplace casting shadows on his haggard face. He'd been avoiding her, running from the consequences of a past that refused to stay buried. But Caroline wasn't here to chase him. She was here to make a choice, one that would define their future. "You have to fix this," she said, her voice trembling with resolve, "or I walk away forever." Levi's gaze met hers, a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes that Caroline hadn't seen before. "It's not that simple," he whispered. "Nothing about my past is simple." Caroline's mind raced as she weighed her options. Stay and fight for a marriage that had become a battleground of secrets and danger, or leave and protect her family from the chaos Levi had unleashed. The choice felt heavier than any decision she'd ever made. Her family's faces flashed before. Timmy's terrified eyes, her mother's trembling hands, her father's broken spirit. They'd already sacrificed so much for her happiness. Could she abandon them now? But staying meant embracing a life of fear, of looking over her shoulder, of never knowing when Levi's past would strike again. The line between love and survival had blurred into a chaotic mess, and Caroline was drowning in the gray areas. Levi's voice pulled her back. "If you leave, they'll keep coming," he said, his tone raw with honesty. "The people from my past, they won't stop until they've taken everything." Caroline's heart ached. She knew he was right. The reporters, the threats, the vandalism, none of it would end just because she walked away. But could she truly forgive Levi for the pain he'd caused, for the life he'd dragged her into? The cottage felt like a pressure cooker, the silence between them heavy with unspoken truths. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why drag me into this?" Levi's response was a whisper. "Because I needed someone to care." The admission hung between them, fragile and raw. Caroline's anger flared. "Care? You used me. You used my family's suffering to manipulate me into a marriage of convenience." Levi's gaze dropped. "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry. But I'm not the same man I was then." The words felt like a lifeline, but Caroline wasn't sure she could grasp it. Could she find a way to forgive Levi? To trust him again? The cottage's walls seemed to close in around them, the storm outside mirroring the tempest in her heart. She thought of the life they'd built, a life of luxury and lies, and the family she'd left behind, now caught in the crossfire of Levi's battles. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Levi stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. "I want you to stay," he said, his voice breaking. "But I understand if you can't." Caroline's breath hitched. This was the moment of truth, the moment she'd been dreading since the day she'd agreed to Levi's proposal. Stay and fight for a future that might never come, or leave, and risk losing everything she'd worked to build. The decision came in a flash of clarity. Caroline took a deep breath and met Levi's gaze. "I choose us," she said, her voice steady despite the fear pooling in her stomach. "But this time, it's on my terms." Levi's eyes widened, a flicker of hope replacing the resignation that had settled there. "Your terms," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. Caroline's mind raced as she outlined her conditions: a full accounting of Levi's past, transparency with the media, and a genuine effort to rebuild their marriage on a foundation of trust. Levi listened, his expression a mix of gratitude and determination. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his promise echoing in the cottage's silent walls. Caroline's heart raced. This was their second chance, a chance to rewrite their story, to build a life not just of convenience but of true partnership. As the storm outside began to fade, Caroline and Levi sat together by the fireplace, their hands intertwined. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers they couldn't yet anticipate. But for the first time, Caroline felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could emerge from the shadows of Levi's past and build something real. Something worth fighting for. The world outside would continue to knock at their door, demanding answers and threatening chaos. But inside the cottage, in that quiet moment of vulnerability and resolve, Caroline knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. And this time, they would face it as equals. Two broken souls, choosing to heal, one day at a time. The cottage's atmosphere was thick with tension as Levi stared into the fireplace, the flickering flames reflecting in his haunted eyes. Caroline sat across from him, her presence a silent demand for honesty. Levi's hands trembled as he reached for a glass of whiskey, the liquid trembling in the glass. "I never thought it would come to this," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Caroline's voice was steady but firm. "You've kept us in the dark long enough, Levi. It's time for the truth." Levi's gaze lifted, meeting hers with a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "The truth is a beast," he said, his voice breaking. "It'll destroy everything." Caroline leaned forward. "Maybe, but it'll also set us free." Levi's breakdown began with a single tear, a rare show of emotion from the man who'd spent years perfecting his icy facade. "I was 18 when I met Elena," he started, his voice trembling. "She was everything: light, laughter, love. My father disapproved, of course. He saw her as a distraction from the empire he was building through me." Caroline listened, her heart aching as Levi's story unfolded. Elena had been the one person who'd seen beyond his wealth and power, the person who'd loved him for himself. But Levi's father had other plans. "He threatened to cut me off unless I ended things with her," Levi said, his voice cracking. "I chose the empire. I chose power over love." The words hung in the air, heavy with regret. The guilt followed Levi like a shadow. Years later, when Elena had resurfaced, seeking help after a failed business venture, Levi had been torn between old feelings and new obligations. "I should have helped her," he said, his voice raw, "but I was afraid of what my father would do, afraid of losing the empire I'd built." Caroline's mind raced. This was the root of Levi's coldness, his fear of vulnerability. His empire wasn't just a collection of companies, it was a shield against the pain of his past. "Elena died because of my choices," Levi whispered, his tears now flowing freely. "Her death was the price I paid for power." Caroline's breath hitched. This was the truth she'd been searching for, the truth that explained Levi's detachment and his willingness to manipulate others, including her. As Levi's confession continued, the full weight of his past became clear. His business empire was built on a series of morally ambiguous deals, alliances with dangerous people, and sacrifices that had cost innocent lives. "Every success I've had carries a scar," he said, his voice shaking, a reminder of what I've done to get here. Caroline's heart ached for the man behind the billionaire's image, the man who'd lost his capacity for love in pursuit of power. "You can't change the past," she said gently, "but you can choose a different future." Levi's gaze met hers, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Do you really believe that?" he asked. Caroline nodded. "I do. But only if you're willing to fight for it." The cottage's atmosphere shifted subtly. The air, once heavy with guilt and silence, now carried a fragile hope. Levi's breakdown had opened a door, one that led to vulnerability and the possibility of redemption. "I'm ready to start over," he said, his voice steady for the first time since the conversation began. "But I need your help." Caroline's response was a gentle smile. "We'll face it together." The words felt like a vow, not just to Levi, but to herself. She would not let fear dictate their future. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges they couldn't yet anticipate. But in this moment, surrounded by the warmth of the fireplace and the raw honesty between them, Caroline felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could emerge from the shadows of Levi's past and build something real, something worth fighting for. As dawn approached, Levi and Caroline sat together in the growing light, their hands intertwined. The world outside would continue to knock at their door, demanding answers and threatening chaos. But inside the cottage, in that quiet moment of vulnerability and resolve, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. And this time, they would face it as equals, two broken souls choosing to heal, one day at a time. The "I" past was a heavy burden, but it no longer held them captive. Their journey toward redemption had just begun, and though the path was uncertain, they were ready to walk it side by side. The days following Levi's breakdown were filled with a fragile hope that slowly began to mend the cracks in their marriage. The cottage became a sanctuary, a place where the masks fell away, and honesty, though painful, became their new currency. Caroline and Levi spent hours by the fireplace, Levi's confessions pouring out like water from a broken dam. He spoke of his childhood, the pressure to succeed, the love and loss of Elena, and the dark deals that had built his empire. Caroline listened, her heart aching with each revelation. Levi's vulnerability was a gift, one that allowed her to see the man beneath the billionaire's facade, a man who'd been broken by his past, but was determined to rebuild. One morning, as the first light of dawn crept through the cottage windows, Levi turned to Caroline with a look of resolve. "I'm going to do things differently," he said, his voice steady. "Starting today." Caroline nodded, her eyes reflecting the determination in his. "I'm with you," she said, her voice filled with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. They began with small steps. Levi contacted his lawyer to start dissolving some of his more dubious business ventures, while Caroline worked on rebuilding her family's trust. They made a pact to face the world together, their unity, a shield against the storms that still raged outside. The journey wasn't without its challenges. Reporters still lurked outside the mansion gates, their questions sharp and persistent. "Is your husband planning to turn himself in?" one shouted as Levi and Caroline arrived for a court hearing, related to his past dealings. Levi stood tall, his arm protectively around Caroline's waist. "We're facing this together," he said to the press, his voice unwavering. The reporters' frenzy died down slightly, their interest replaced by speculation about the couple's newfound unity. Slowly, the narrative began to shift from one of scandal to one of redemption. Caroline and Levi also worked to repair the damage done to her family. They visited her father at the vandalized medical center, Levi's presence a surprise to the staff and patients. "I'm here to help rebuild," he said, his words met with skepticism, but his actions with gratitude. Over the following weeks, Levi funded the center's restoration, his generosity a public gesture of his commitment to change. Caroline's father, though still healing, found a renewed sense of purpose. "You've given me back my life," he whispered to Levi one afternoon. Levi's response was a simple nod. "Consider it a late wedding gift." As the months passed, the couple's relationship deepened in ways neither had anticipated. They learned to navigate disagreements with honesty, to share their fears without judgment, and to build a partnership founded on mutual respect. One evening, as they walked hand in hand along the beach near the cottage, Caroline turned to Levi with a smile. "Do you remember the day you proposed?" she asked, her voice light. Levi chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "How could I forget? You almost threw the ring at me." Caroline laughed, the sound melodic and free. "I was desperate and foolish." Levi stopped, turning her to face him. "You were brave," he said, his gaze locking onto hers. "Braver than I was." The moment was tender, a testament to how far they'd come. The path to healing wasn't linear. There were setbacks, nights when old fears resurfaced, moments of doubt when the weight of the past threatened to overwhelm them. But they faced each challenge together, their bond strengthening with each trial. Levi's late-night calls decreased, replaced by conversations with therapists and legal advisors as he worked to dismantle the dangerous parts of his empire. Caroline resumed her studies, pursuing a degree in social work, a dream reignited by her experiences. They built a life not of convenience, but of purpose. The world watched with a mix of skepticism and fascination as Levi and Caroline's story unfolded. Some called it a publicity stunt, others a fairy tale. But for the couple, it was simply truth, A truth that, though messy and imperfect, provided a foundation stronger than any they'd known before. They learned that love, real love, wasn't built on perfection or illusion. It was built on honesty, on facing darkness together, and on choosing each other, day after day. As they stood together at the cottage's doorstep one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Caroline leaned into Levi's side. "We made it," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet triumph. Levi kissed the top of her head, his heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. "We're making it," he corrected gently. "One day at a time." And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of their renewed bond and the promise of a future yet unwritten, Caroline knew that they would. The final chapter of Caroline and Levi's story unfolded slowly, like a wound healing beneath the sun. The world outside still whispered of scandal and conspiracy, but inside their rebuilt life, there was a quiet strength that neither could deny. Levi's transformation was evident, not just in his actions, but in the way he carried himself. The icy billionaire had given way to a man who, though still flawed, was willing to face his demons head-on. Caroline watched in awe as he navigated the aftermath of his past, testifying in court against those who'd manipulated him, funding charities to atone for his mistakes, and rebuilding the trust of those he'd hurt along the way. Caroline's role in Levi's redemption was one of unwavering support. She stood by his side during press conferences, her presence a quiet testament to their partnership. She accompanied him to therapy sessions, her hand often clasped in his as they faced difficult conversations. And she worked tirelessly to repair the damage done to her family, using her newfound influence to advocate for financial reform and support for families in debt. "We're in this together," she'd say whenever Levi's resolve wavered. And together, they forged a new path, one paved with truth and accountability. The most surprising aspect of their journey was the love that emerged from the ashes of their convenient marriage. What had once been a transactional relationship evolved into something profound and genuine. Levi's vulnerability had opened a door to emotional intimacy that neither had anticipated. They laughed together, shared quiet moments of reflection, and built a life that felt authentic for the first time. "I never knew love could look like this," Levi admitted one evening as they watched the sunset from their garden. Caroline smiled, her heart full. "Neither did I." The world's skepticism slowly gave way to reluctant admiration. Reporters who had once hounded them for scandals now wrote about their redemption story, a modern-day fairy tale of love and forgiveness. But for Caroline and Levi, the real magic wasn't in the headlines. It was in the small moments. The way Levi now helped Timmy with his homework, the way Caroline's father had regained his strength and purpose, the way they'd turned a life built on lies into one founded on truth. As the years passed, the shadows of Levi's past receded, though they never disappeared entirely. There were still whispers, still unanswered questions, still moments when old fears resurfaced. But they faced each challenge together, their bond unshakable. Levi's empire evolved into a force for good, funding innovations in healthcare and education, while Caroline became a voice for families caught in cycles of debt. Their marriage, once a cold contract, became a partnership of equals, a testament to the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. In the end, Caroline realized that saving Levi hadn't been about fixing his past mistakes. It had been about choosing to see the good in him, to believe in his capacity for change, and to walk alongside him as he rebuilt his life. And in saving him, she'd found herself, a woman stronger than she'd ever known, a fighter who'd emerged from the ashes of convenience to build a life of purpose and love. The road had been long and fraught with danger, but they'd walked it together. And as they stood hand in hand at the threshold of an uncertain but hopeful future, Caroline knew that whatever came next, they were ready to face it. Caroline stood at the edge of the garden, the morning dew clinging to her shoes, as she watched the sun rise over the horizon. 10 years had passed since she'd first agreed to Levi's desperate proposal, and the world had changed in ways she could never have imagined. The mansion that once felt like a gilded cage was now a place of warmth and family, a home where laughter echoed through the halls and love filled the silence. Yet the past had a way of lingering, its shadows stretching into the present like unwelcome guests. Levi approached her, his footsteps silent on the grass. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, his voice gentle. Caroline smiled. "Just remembering," she said, "how far we've come." Levi's gaze followed hers to the horizon, where the first light of day painted the sky in soft pinks and golds. "We've been lucky," he said, his tone thoughtful. "But luck runs out eventually." Caroline turned to him, her expression serious. "Then we make our own luck," she replied. It was a mantra they'd lived by through the years, a reminder that their future was theirs to shape. The arrival of the letter changed everything. It was delivered by hand, the envelope heavy with official insignia. Caroline opened it with trembling hands, her heart sinking as she read the contents. An old enemy from Levi's past had surfaced, a man named Victor Radek, someone from Elena's world who'd been biding his time in the shadows. "The time has come to settle accounts," the letter read. "Your husband's debts are now due." Caroline's mind raced. They'd thought Victor was in prison, thought they'd seen the last of his threats, but here he was, resurfacing with a vengeance. Levi's response was immediate. "We face him," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Together." Caroline nodded, though fear gnawed at her. Victor wasn't just a criminal mastermind. He was a ghost from Levi's past, someone who'd escaped justice time and time again. They gathered their allies, Ms. Chen, the sharp-tongued lawyer who'd stood by them from the beginning, Clara, now a trusted confidant, and even Mrs. Hargrove, whose loyalty to Levi was unwavering. "We've fought harder battles," Ms. Chen said, her gaze sharp, "and we've always come out on top." The plan was risky. They'd lure Victor into a trap, using Levi as bait to draw him out into the open. Caroline's role was to stay behind, but she refused. "I'm not hiding. This time," she insisted. "I'm part of this fight." Levi's protest was expected, but Caroline's resolve was unshakable. The night before the confrontation, they sat together in the study, their hands intertwined. "No matter what happens," Levi said, his voice breaking slightly, "I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become." Caroline's eyes welled with tears. "And I'm proud of you," she whispered, "every step of the way." The confrontation took place in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the perfect backdrop for a final showdown. Victor arrived with a small entourage, his presence as menacing as ever. "You should have stayed buried," Levi said, his voice cutting through the tension. Victor laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "And you should have known better than to cross me." The air crackled with hostility as Levi and Victor circled each other like wolves. Caroline stood at Levi's side, her presence a silent challenge to Victor's authority. The fight was intense, the warehouse echoing with the sounds of scuffling footsteps and raised voices. Victor's men lunged at Levi, but Caroline was ready. With a quick, thinking on my feet, she grabbed a nearby pipe and swung it at the nearest attacker, catching him off guard. Levi seized the opportunity to disarm another thug, his movements precise and calculated. Ms. Chen and Clara arrived with backup. Local authorities they'd quietly alerted to the location. "Game over, Victor," Ms. Chen announced, her voice triumphant as police sirens wailed in the distance. Victor's arrest was a turning point, but it wasn't the end. In the aftermath, new truths emerged. Truths that forced Caroline and Levi to confront the full extent of their journey. Elena's death had been no accident, but a carefully orchestrated hit, ordered by Victor himself. Levi's testimony in court brought long overdue justice, but it also laid bare the full weight of his past mistakes. The media circus reignited. Briefly, but this time, the narrative was different. Levi and Caroline were hailed as survivors, their story a testament to resilience and redemption. As the dust settled, Caroline found herself reflecting on the woman she'd become. She'd started as a desperate soul, willing to sacrifice everything for her family's survival. Now she was a fighter, a leader, a woman who'd helped reshape not just Levi's life, but countless others through her non-profit work. Levi, too, had transformed, from a man consumed by guilt and power to one who'd found purpose in giving back. Their marriage, once a cold contract, had evolved into a partnership built on love and respect. The future held new challenges, but also new promises. Levi's empire continued to evolve, now focused entirely on ethical ventures. Caroline's non-profit had expanded internationally, touching lives in ways she'd once thought impossible. And their family, once broken by debt and fear, was now whole. Timmy pursuing his dream of becoming a doctor, her parents thriving in retirement, and Levi and Caroline welcoming their first child into a world of love and possibility. In the end, Caroline realized that the past wasn't something to be outrun, but a teacher, a guide that had shaped them into the people they were meant to be. And as she stood beside Levi, watching their son take his first steps in the garden, she knew that their story wasn't one of scandal or convenience. It was a story of love forged in fire, of redemption earned through struggle, and of a future built not on the lies of yesterday, but on the truths of tomorrow. Wow, what a ride, am I right? So what hit you the hardest? Was it the shocking twists, the raw emotions, or maybe that moment where you just wanted to shake Levi and scream, "Wake up, man!" Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm dying to know. And hey, if this story left you craving more, smash that like button and share it with your squad. Let's keep the conversation going. After all, isn't it just wild how some people's lives feel like they're straight out of a thriller? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because there's a whole lot of drama and intrigue waiting in the wings. You won't want to miss out. See you next time, truth seekers. Stay curious and stay hungry for the next chapter.